or a beverage of your choice. They're exchangeable. If you've already got Spanish beer, I can see in the chat. So super, thank you for volunteering. If anyone wants to head over to the new Hedgedoc site that we've got to help take notes, that would also be appreciated as well. Thank you, Bron. So hopefully everyone's got their audio set up okay, and you can see the slides as well that we're projecting. So if either of those things aren't showing for you and you can't hear me, then maybe refresh or follow some of the Meet Echo troubleshooting stuff that we've got going on. Okay, well, we're at 12 o'clock, so let's get the party started. Welcome to IETF112, the Dispatch Working Group Art Area virtual meeting, the first session of the week. As always, delighted to have you here. I'm Kirsty Payne, one of the co-chairs of Dispatch, and we've got Patrick McManus as my other co-chair here as well. So we're going to run through the note well, particularly because this is the first session of the week. We'll just spend a little bit longer on this. It's a reminder of all the IETF policies that are in place throughout the whole week, and that includes this session. A little reminder of the IETF's patent policy and the definition of a contribution and participation in BCP 79. So do read that through, and just be aware that by participating in the IETF, you agree to all of these procedures. So have a read through the anti-harassment procedures, the code of conduct, copyright, working group procedures, internet standards procedures, patents, participation, and of course the privacy policy. You will have agreed to this when you registered for the meeting, but just to make a little note of it now, especially note really well. So we're just going to highlight these few things as a new push for this IETF. So you might see this in a few other working groups as well. Please really take a moment to look at the guidelines for conduct, the anti-harassment policy, and the anti-harassment procedures. Those are all the RFCs and links on the slides, which you can find on the meeting materials in Meet Echo or on the dispatch page as well. And if you have any concerns about observed behaviours, please talk to the Ombudsman team. They are there, they're available if you need to confidentially raise concerns about harassment or other conduct in the IETF. It's really important that we have a creative, maintain an environment where people can be treated with dignity, decency, and respect, and that allows us to do our best creative work. So those who participate in the IETF should have behaviour according to professional standards and appropriate workplace behaviour. Do not engage in harassment, and if you believe you've been harassed, like we said, please raise it with the Ombuds team. Okay, so we'll move on to a little bit about virtual meeting participation. This might be your 6th virtual meeting at the IETF, it might be your first one, but just as for your awareness, this session is being recorded, so please use a headset. You can add yourself to the Meet Echo queue to speak and say your name before speaking. So you'll see that on the top left of your screen, there's a little hand with a line through it. If you click that, that puts you in the queue, and then the chairs can call you forward or the presenter can call you forward in the queue. And then you'll see a few kind of buttons along the top. You can start your video and you can share your audio as well. We ask you not to share your video unless you are speaking, just to help others with bandwidth issues. Side discussions in Jabber that you can see on the left of your screen in that chat, they're fine, but please do consider bringing important points to the queue for the recording. And for those of you that remember in-person meetings, you don't have to worry about blue sheets. That's all taken from the Meet Echo roster. So we've got some useful links on this slide. Anything about meeting materials and stuff like that are on the dispatch session pages. But here are some Meet Echo links specifically, and places that you can take notes, find Jabber, and how to navigate Meet Echo through the rest of the week as well. So with that kind of bit done, we'll look at the dispatch virtual meeting that we've got going on today. So here's our agenda, just nearly 1 minute to go to finish this sort of status and agenda bash from chairs and ADs. We've got a couple of items this morning in dispatch, and just to mention the media over quick item in the art area, which is new, kind of a shout out, but the timing there is unfortunately not right. It will just be at the end of the art area meeting, and we'll just sort of do a quick mention on media over quick, but that item is new and those slides were just uploaded this morning. So do take a look at that if you would like to participate in that discussion. It's just for info, really. So that's our agenda. We'll just pause in case there's any comments on the agenda bash. I've already bashed the agenda, noting that the time's not right, but more comments are welcome, otherwise we'll get to it. Okay, so with that then, we'll have our first speaker. So it's Matt Byington. I'll stop sharing slides, and then Matt, if you would like to, just click the button. We can share our preloaded slides and you can click through. Matt, if you're there.
Yes, I'm here. Hopefully everybody can hear me okay.
Can hear you fine.
Great. So shall I click that button in the upper left to share slides?
Yes, please. So there should be preloaded slides. You should see yours there.
Great.
Super.
Hopefully everybody can see
slides.
that.
Yeah, we can. Off you go.
Great. Thank you so much, Kirsty. This is my first participation in IETF, so it's a pleasure to be here. And hello from the West Coast, bright early in the morning. I'm going to be sharing our internet draft for secure credential transfer. This is a protocol that we've designed to, first of all, highlight the problem statement itself, which is the ability to share credentials securely between devices. So in the modern world, more and more credentials are being stored securely in users' digital wallets rather than their physical badges or cards. Some use cases do necessitate sharing of these credentials from one person to another. So for example, you may have a vehicle and a digital key on your mobile device that allows you to unlock and operate that vehicle. And you may endeavor to share this credential with a family member or a friend or a valet. However, today, no secure method to share these digital credentials exists. And moreover, it doesn't exist in a cross-platform and channel agnostic capacity. So the goals for the design here would be that the sharing mechanism should work regardless of the type of credential. So it could be, as I mentioned earlier, a key to unlock and drive a vehicle, or it could be a key to access a hotel. It could be a key to access your own home, your single family home or multifamily home. There are a variety of different credentials that this should work for. This also must work for symmetric and asymmetric credentials. So I'm just going to spend a few seconds talking about this. A symmetric credential would be something akin to a MyFair DeskFire applet. MyFair DeskFire is a very popular technology in the access space for corporate offices, hotels, sometimes even transit around the world. And then there are asymmetric keys that are used. One example of an asymmetric key would be the ISO 18016 specification. That's an asymmetric credential. And then also digital car key credentials are asymmetric as well. There's the CCC, the Connected Car Consortium public standards body that specifies how these keys work for vehicles that the vast majority of the OEMs participate in. And that's how those keys work across different types of vehicles. We also endeavored to have the sender retain ability to manage credentials that they've shared. So that's a very important feature here. If you've shared your key to your home or your vehicle and you wish to revoke that share, you should be able to do that. And then we also want the ecosystem to support any mobile device operating system OEM that adheres to the standard being proposed here. So this should work between devices running Apple's iOS platform or Google's Android platform or any other mobile operating system that chooses to participate in this standard. I'll also just touch really quickly, a couple of folks in the email group had some really great questions, and I just want to touch on one of them really fast on this slide, which is the ability to actually share these credentials themselves. On mobile devices, these credentials are stored in what's called a secure element. The secure element is a tamper-resistant piece of hardware. They're almost always single-threaded, and part of those secure elements is that it's impossible to extract a credential, or it's extremely difficult to extract a credential from them. That's part of what makes them tamper-resistant instead of something like a physical card that can be stolen. The high-level solution that we've been proposing in the internet draft includes a new type of server called a relay server. And the purpose of this relay server is to establish quote unquote connectivity between a sender and a receiver. And the idea is that the relay server is a simple mailbox and fully decoupled from the credential provisioning and registration. What I mean by that is, let's pretend you have a sender that currently has a credential provisioned on his or her device. When you share that credential, the relay server is acting as just a pipe for some data to travel between the sender and the receiver. Once the receiver receives this data, it will likely need to contact a server, which is typically the Credential Authority, in order to actually provision a credential. In other words, it's not the credential itself that is sent between sender and receiver. It is some metadata or some seed data, some authorization data, in order for the receiver to be able to procure such a credential. The relay server also, from a privacy perspective, should only receive data that is field level encrypted, and then some high level metadata for the receiver to be able to understand what it has just received. Some of the design requirements here include that the relay server should not know the identity of the sender nor of the receiver. So in the internet draft, there are some additional complexity listed for having anonymous attestations to authenticate the sender that don't disclose the identity of the sender. This relay server also shall not interface with any other server. It's purely used for transport between sender and recipient, and in some cases, vice versa, back from recipient to sender. As I mentioned, all of the sensitive data over the relay server is field level encrypted, ensuring that the relay server cannot see what is being shared. And the sharing should be able to be initiated or occur in any communication channel. This could be email, this could be SMS or iMessage or a WhatsApp application. This is a high-level diagram that I'll spend a few minutes walking through just to have a visual of the flow that I've discussed. I'll start by describing all of the actors that are in the white boxes, and then I'll talk about the flow itself. So in the lower left of your screen, that's the sending device. That's the device that ostensibly already has a credential provisioned on it that wants to share to the box in the lower right. That is the receiving device. In the bottom middle, there is the communication channel itself. This could be WhatsApp, SMS, email, or anything else. In the middle of your screen is the relay server that is this new actor in the ecosystem that we've been proposing transport the data between sender and receiver. There are a number of reasons for the relay server. I'm hoping we can get into some Q&A after the slides and talk about it. The metadata required to provision these credentials is oftentimes fairly large, maybe 500 bytes or a kilobyte, and that data obviously can't travel in a single SMS message. It would also be very confusing to the user if they saw binary data that was encoded in hex or base64 traveling in their actual message channel. So by sending a URL in number 3 that points to the data, you can have a much better experience for the receiver with the data actually being procured from the relay server. In the upper left of your screen, device operating system manufacturer server, and then same thing on the upper right. This would be a server that's owned and operated by Apple if the sender was an iPhone or an Apple Watch, or by Google if the sender was an Android device, and then vice versa for the receiver. So it's basically the operating system on the mobile device. Whichever company builds that operating system and operates it would be that server that you see there. In the middle top of your screen, Credential Authority. So when you look at these types of credentials, there's almost always a remote credential authority that is issuing these credentials. And this credential authority typically is the only entity that can issue them. So for example, if you were sharing a hotel key, that credential authority would be, for example, the Hyatt company as one example. I mentioned earlier why you can't just send a credential from the sender to the receiver. You also can't duplicate it. You can't clone them. These are all security primitives of the secure element on the sending device. The credential authority would be the only entity that can issue a credential. So the basic flow, starting in the lower left and going up with number one, the sending device is effectively reaching out to the credential authority through the OEM server and obtaining effectively a bearer token, authenticating to the credential authority as the sender that already has a current provisioned credential. That credential authority will mint a new bearer token and store it and send it back down to the sender. And then the sender is going to be wrapping this data up, sending the data to the relay server. The relay server will generate a URL for the relay server itself. The URI will be highly defined in the specification. The URL could be whatever the relay server wants to. That might give spatial locality for bandwidth, depending on where folks are in the world, or load balancing. If you want to have different shards, and then the sender will send this URL over the communication channel down at the bottom here to the receiver. The receiver will download the data from the relay server and provision or register this credential against their own device OS OEM that then goes to the credential authority, exchanging the bearer token for a newly minted credential. It's also worth noting we were thinking of using Open Graph as a data structure for the contents of the link when an HTTP GET is called on the relay server. Open Graph is a very popular standard, as I'm sure a lot of folks on this call would be aware, that allows for rich preview. It's very prevalent on messaging applications, on social media sites, especially when you share, for example, if you find a restaurant on Yelp or some other type of website, when you share that with somebody else, there's typically an Open Graph preview that's rendered with an image and some text, and that way the link looks nice on the receiver's device. We do intend to make use of that to show what the sender is sharing with the receiver. I think with that, that's the basic presentation that I wanted to describe for how it works. I know Kirsty mentioned that we do have a little bit of extra time today, which is great. I know there were some questions over the email group from Eric and from others. I'd be happy to answer those, or if we wanted to take some questions from folks in the chat. Again, this is my first participation in IETF, so I'm not sure what the best place to take Q&A from, but I would be happy to answer some questions.
Hey, Matt, this is Patrick. I'm Kirsty's co-chair here, going to help run the queue during this part of the discussion. So
Great.
I wanted to start by thanking you for bringing this to the IETF. I really appreciate it. There are a few very interesting elements here, and we'll see whether or not folks think this is an appropriate IETF work item or not. But either way, I do appreciate you bringing it in. A reminder to our group, because it is the first meeting of the week, the goal here is to figure out the right home for the work we're talking about, not to resolve any or all issues, identify all issues and resolve them here during the meeting, but to figure out what the right group of people and the right forum it is to work on. So, Matt, I do have one question for you before, and feel free, I see Pete's in the queue, feel free to join the queue. We do, as Matt said, have a little more time than usual with a light agenda, so we won't be too strict on staying to our time window, so we can do some discussion of what's in the draft as well as its outcome if it's helpful in figuring out the outcome. So, Matt, I do have one question before we get started. Just what is the sort of state of the technology described by this draft? Is this conceptual and all change control will live with the IETF if the IETF chooses to adopt this work? Is this something that's already been deployed and there's some constraints around that? That kind of thing. If you could kind of give us some flavor, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely, Patrick. I would say it's somewhere in between. There have been meetings between some companies around this topic so far. So one of the topics here has been, this is a cross-platform sharing mechanism that would need to be adopted by, for example, the vehicle OEMs. And so we have been having some preliminary discussions with both the device OS OEMs, as I mentioned before. So that would be Google and Apple and others. And then also the vehicle OEMs, because there is currently a sharing protocol defined in the CCC standard that we are actually proposing to remove and reference the IETF standard for a more global and cross-platform and open channel solution. So we have had some discussions with the CCC body as well. And so the feature is not launched yet, but we do have plans to build something like this, and we will, obviously would love to take feedback and make the solution better from the IETF group, but there are concrete plans to implement a solution that satisfies the goals described in this presentation.
Okay, thank you for that. Would you like me to open up the queue, or would you like to address any of the comments from the mailing list first? I'll leave that up to you.
I think Eric Rescorla, hopefully I did not butcher your last name, had a number of great questions. Maybe I can touch on those really quickly.
Yeah, he is in the queue as well. I thought you might want to address Ted's comments. I know Ted cannot make the meeting.
Yeah, I would love to. I was unable to find Ted's comments. Is there any way that you have them, or
All right, I will look into that. They may have just been sent to the chairs. I'm not confident. So I will read those back in a few minutes for us. But why don't we open the queue now for the sake of time? Pete, you're first. Pete, can you hear us? All right, Philip, why don't you jump over Pete in the queue and we'll come back to Pete.
Okay, yeah. Why not use Saml? I mean, like, it exists. It's a standard. It was designed to do exactly this.
I may not be familiar with that. Can you describe it a little bit?
It's an OASIS standard. It's it has its origins in PKIX. Basically started off with the rationalization of the PKIX architecture put into XML. So it has an assertion format that's extremely flexible, and its application was to authentication and authorization. And it is widely used in enterprises, including Apple and Google. It's the way that pretty much every piece of enterprise software will talk to pretty much every other piece of enterprise software under the covers, where A needs to authenticate to B. There is a binding to HTML and the web, of course, but you don't have to do that. You can do it. You can do it without. I've not been involved in that world for well over a decade, but it does exist. It is widely supported. It's all existing code.
I see. I think, at least in my opinion, the format of the messages in 2 and 4, the contents of them, and even how authentication works, is not. I think those could vary, and we could debate that absolutely. I think the main architectural piece that I'm trying to highlight, that I think there's a gap for, is that the messages can't be sent directly from the sender to the receiver. The credential itself cannot be extracted from the sender and sent to the receiver. And we need some kind of a server that relays messages to and from the sender and receiver to get around certain communication channel restrictions. And so I would be open to researching different formats of messages in 2 and 4 absolutely. But I think the main architectural piece here is the presence of the relay server and how the sender and the receiver use it, if that makes any sense.
Well, you're doing it in JSON, but I would look at the assertion format. It was designed to be a completely flexible system originally. It may have ossified into a particular niche, but that was the goal. But anyway, I'll let others talk.
Understood. I will make a note and look into that.
Sam, you're up.
Matt, thanks for bringing it to us. This looks like a set of problems that I've been thinking about in the context of WebAuthn, which I've characterized as selective permissionless delegation. And I've posited that the solution to it will also potentially address the device recovery loss and migration problems. That said, when I look at what you're describing here, I don't see a way that it works with hardware-backed crypto stores like a YubiKey, some other hardware token, where you don't then drill a backdoor into it to get the crypto key out. I'm not hearing you describe that this is permissionless. I'm hearing you say, in the case of the auto folks, that you'd need the auto OEM to get involved. And I wish I were hearing that as a requirement. And I'm also not sure I'm hearing an answer here for revocation. I had used the word, or this word, selective delegation. I think we've been talking a little bit here about revocation, but I don't see that answer. So while I think there are interesting problems here, I would love to see progress. I'm not convinced that we actually have, that you here have the problem statement worked out, never mind a good solution for it. So maybe the best suggestion is a BOF to work on the requirements. And I'll turn it back over for responses or to Stephen.
I appreciate the correct answer to the dispatch question. Stephen.
Sure. Yeah, so I guess kind of like Sam, I think there's an interesting area. I don't think the internet draft, particularly, or the presentation, indicates that it's, the problem statement is fully worked out enough yet. And it sounds like this could get very complicated, particularly with managing credentials after you've shared them or transferred them. So I'm not fussed if it would turn into a BOF, but I do think that there would be need, if this goes forward, and I would like to see it go forward, there should be work on the requirements. I'd also be, one other thing is, I would hope we don't start working on things that assume there needs to be, there absolutely needs to be an operating system overlord like an Android or a iOS involved in the game for it to work at all. It should work on the internet without those kind of setups.
Got it. Thank you so much, Sam and Stephen. I might just take a quick minute to respond to a couple of those things. On the revocation story, when you think about revocation with something like this, once the receiver has provisioned a credential, you have to imagine that relay server and the communication channel no longer exist, right? Because the sender only has the ability to send messages to the receiver over text or email or whatever the communication channel was. And they could be totally different operating systems. The sender could be on iOS and the receiver could be on Android. And so from a revocation perspective, all of that will be happening through the Credential Authority itself. So the Credential Authority knows both of these credentials that were issued to the sender and the receiver. The Credential Authority is the authority of those credentials, and it understands the link between them, given that the sender shared with the receiver. And so basically the idea for revocation is that if the sender desires to revoke the credential, it would send a message to the Credential Authority asking to revoke a specific share or send. And from that share identifier or send identifier, the Credential Authority would both be able to look up the receiver's credential and be able to perform authentication on the sender to see if the sender was the entity that shared with the receiver in the first place. In that case, the Credential Authority essentially has to keep a graph of shares on its side, and all of the revocation, the authentication for it needs to be performed by the Credential Authority, which is the only authority that really bridges the gap between the sender and the receiver. And so that was kind of my answer, I think, mostly to Sam's question. But these are all great comments. I'm also taking notes here on my side.
Thanks, Matt. Hector.
Thanks for the talk. So I think, let me start with the dispatch questions, which is, I think that, like, as other people were saying, I think it's pretty hard to reverse engineer the requirements out of this document. So I think the place to start is the requirements, and then we can talk about what to design. There seem to be a bunch of implicit requirements that are driving this design that I'm having trouble, like, sort of understanding how you got here. So in particular, like, I guess, given that you have to, I heard this point repeatedly about how big SMS messages are, but given that what you're actually doing is giving a token, which is then used to redeem at the device OEM server via the Credential Authority, I'm not sure why this can't be small. I think, generally, like, what I notice about this is you seem to be solving the easy problem, which is once you've established a secure channel, how to get data across it. But the difficult problem is how to establish a secure channel. And so I think, for us to sort of assume that, like, SMS is, like, totally secure seems like kind of like not a great place to start. But in any case, I think certainly be interesting to talk about working on this. But I think the place to start is, with a pretty clear statement of the requirements case, and then we can talk about the design space, which may be larger than you have.
Got it. That makes sense, Eric. Thank you, and thank you so much for your comments and email. Those were great as well. I think on the requirements, sounds good. I hear you. I will try to document them further. On the small token, the bearer token that's obtained from the Credential Authority needs to be somewhat polymorphic, or at least be allowed to be. For example, you might have a Credential Authority that doesn't want to store the token in non-volatile storage, and thus might need to have a digital signature applied to it that they could verify themselves when the receiver gives it back to them, things like that. And so I think the size of that token will be relatively small, but maybe up to a kilobyte or two, depending on what key was used to sign it. Or if they want to store it, then of course it could probably just be a UUID and they don't need to sign it. I think in general, the experience for the receiver is important. And if you are a receiver receiving an iMessage or an SMS or an email, you probably don't want to see a bunch of bits and bytes in there. And that token needs to have a number of things in it. Also, notably, it needs to have information required for any device OS OEM to provision this. And so you might have Apple specific data or Google specific data. All of them would need to be present to invoke the right API in number 5 to actually provision that credential. Number 5 is not standardized. And then lastly, on your comments on secure channel, totally agree. SMS is obviously not a secure channel. I think in general, in this cross-platform, cross-channel solution, we've effectively deemed recipient binding a non-goal and effectively an impossible problem. You would need, global directory system with all different kinds of channels in it, mapping to public keys so you could do field level encryption to them. And that just doesn't exist in a cross-platform, cross-channel capacity today. I think we do have a number of security mitigations that we've thought through in terms of a low TTL on the relay server for this particular share, device binding in number 4, the idea being a receiver sends a UUID up in number 4 when it first obtains the data, and that kind of binds that receiver to that relay server. The main security mechanism is the entropy of the URL itself. The URL will contain 128-bit UUID, and it's sent over this channel. The channel itself may be insecure, but the receiver will be bound to the relay once it first invokes that relay upon receipt of the message. And the URL itself will be very challenging to guess because of the entropy inside of it. Those were some of the security primitives that we had thought of, although totally agree that is one of the weak security points of this design is the communication channel itself.
I mean, so, yeah, I mean, so I mean, so two. I guess I don't really want to try to break down the design. So I guess um, uh, like all those things depend on the channel, right? If the channel is insecure, then it's game over. So, like in any case, I think I get, so I guess I would make 2 points. As I said, first of all, I think it'd be really helpful to like lay out the requirements. I don't mean, by the way, a document with like a list of like, R1, R2, R3. What I mean is a description of the setting and description of the things that you think are the constraints that you have to operate with. And then we can debate whether those constraints are important or not. So I guess with that said, I am pretty sad about the suggestion that what has to happen here is that the sender has to generate a thing which is acceptable for like every possible kind of receiver. That seems like the point of standards is not to have to do that, and that seems to have an incredible set of lock-in to the incumbent device manufacturers, which is the point I think Stephen Farrell was raising. So, like I think if we're going to do this, what ought to happen is there's one message format which you send, and that message is part has to be processed by everybody, and they have to change. Not that we have like some sort of thing where it's like I have to generate something for Android and iOS and whatever, because that means if I roll a new operating system, basically I'm a host.
Understood.
Thanks, all those. Yeah, that was a good discussion. Thank you. I'm going to move on to Richard next. I just wanted to give folks the heads up that I'm going to hit this powerful lock queue button I got in front of me in a few seconds. So if you'd like to get into the queue, now is the time to virtually stretch your legs and get over there. Richard Barnes, I'm sorry, Rich Sauls. Richard Barnes is next in the queue. You're on the list though.
Thanks, Patrick. So just to hit the dispatch question first, I think this is probably about the right size of work for a small working group. I think it does merit a working group as opposed to going somewhere else, just because it's a fairly discrete subject area and a non-trivial amount of work. I don't think it is. Well, as several other folks have said, I don't think that the clarity is quite here yet with regard to what this group will be doing and what problem it would be solving. So I think we need another iteration on that. I think there's probably a worthwhile thing to work on here. That's kind of where my substantive comments are. It's like I'm a little confused on a couple of points. The trust, this question of trust establishment has been raised a couple of times. I think I was a little troubled by the assertion just now that the communication channel we basically assumed to be unsecure because if there's no security at the bottom, as Ecker noted, like there's no security in the rest of the system either. And so basically all we're just doing is inventing a fancy compression scheme. So I think we need to be super crisp on what the what we assume about that communication channel, what we assume about the relationship between the sender and the receiver is. I think there are probably some options here in terms of things that have a reasonable user experience and do achieve security on that communications channel, but it will require a little bit of thinking about how to align the use case with the security technologies we have available. A quick question. I'm a little bit curious why this mechanism is focused on credentials. It seems like this could be framed as a general mechanism for syncing private data across different instances within a particular security boundary. So I'm a little curious why this isn't a general sync protocol, why it's specifically focused on credentials. And finally, the last point I had, which I think, I think Rich was going to cover Pete, so I'll put that off. So yeah, that's what I got. Thanks.
Got it. Thank you very much, Richard. I fully concur with your last statement there. This really could be generic. I don't think it would be a great mechanism per se for sync in terms of ongoing persistent synchronizing of data between sender and receiver. Typically in those scenarios, you want a much, at least in my opinion, you want a much more well-defined authentication and authorization story between sender and receiver and who can sync and who can push. In this case, it's kind of like a one-shot send where you kind of lob this thing over the fence to the receiver that they can then kind of go provision. And it's, I mean, obviously, a bearer token, the idea is that whomever has possession of the bearer token has the permission and authority to go off and use it. And so I think you're right that it's much more generic than just credentials, but I don't think it should be used for like a persistent sync mechanism that's like an ongoing, sync of data. totally hear you on the lack of clarity. I think that's been mentioned a few times. I will work on putting together a better kind of user story and requirements documentation for that.
And if I may, as you're thinking through those requirements, I would think I would focus a lot on kind of the security assumptions here. Who knows what about whom, with confidence, and things like that. Who is trusted to do what? I think you've captured some of that with talking about what the relay server is trusted to do and not do. But I think highlighting those kind of security assumptions would be really useful.
Yeah, the problem statement we started with was really, if you imagine sharing a photo, let's say you snap a photo on your phone, typically device OEM, you can click a share button somewhere, and it kind of says, hey, how do you want to share this? You want to share it over email or SMS, or Apple has AirDrop, those kind of things. The idea was something very, very similar to that, making it as easy as possible and as seamless as possible to share a credential like a hotel key with a loved one or a family member, just as if you were sharing a photo, and wanting it to work cross-platform. That's kind of the problem statement that we really started with, and with the sender being able to revoke and view who they shared to and all those kind of things, and the short TTL single redemption. We didn't think that the security channel, the communication channel itself needed to be all that secure, because if it's compromised, you can just revoke the credential and share it in some other way. But I will save some of these comments and responses for whenever we establish the appropriate working group.
Cool. Colin.
So two different points I want to talk about, one with spam and one with just what we need to standardize here. But let me just start by saying thank you for bringing this. I really like just the way you've been dealing with all this. I know how frustrating it can be to deal with getting a new group of people up to speed with what's no doubt years of thinking going into this. So bear with us and help us get to the thing. So with that said, let me jump into the big picture here. We have this problem with how to standardize and move things. We actually need to move credentials between devices and video conferencing things and stuff. Where my employer, we use ultrasound for the communications channel that you have there, which is even lower bit rate than SMS. I'm really strongly in favor of solving this problem. But the problem is not standardizing the relay server. The problem is standardizing this whole slide that you have as slide 6. And I feel very strongly we need to figure, and that doesn't mean that every one of these standards need to be done by IETF or whatever, it's just, but we need an overall solution to the big problem of your title, right? Which is how to transfer credentials from sender to receiver. I'm strongly in favor of that. But if all we needed was the relay server here, there's many things we could use. There's many IoT messaging, but there's a ton of technologies that existed over time that allow us to effectively expand out a link to some larger data and do what the relay server thing is here. That's not the problem you're really solving. So I think when you think about the requirements and the solution, I'd really ask for us to talk about the whole problem here, not a teeny part of it. So I want to, standardize, the syringe that moves the drugs around and the drugs here, such that we have an interoperable solution. What we need to be able to say at the end of this is, if two different devices both implemented this, they would be able to securely exchange credentials. Not, well, they could both talk to the same relay server, but all of the hard parts are ignored, right? Let's not ignore the hard parts. Let's do the whole thing. Is that a reasonable scope you're willing to deal with of sort of hitting this whole thing?
Yeah, thank you so much, Colin. I think I really appreciate your comments and questions. I think you're spot on. The part of the challenge here is that when you look at the major device OS OEMs like Apple and Google, they have existing provisioning APIs and rails to get secure credentials into mobile devices for years now. And if you look at credit and debit cards and transit and car keys, these things exist in production today. And part of the complexity here, I think, is the way that Apple does it and the APIs are completely proprietary to Apple, and the way that Google does it and the APIs are completely proprietary to Google, and so on and so forth for different device OS OEMs. And so building a system that allows you to exchange these credentials and standardize those vertical legs there, right? Number 1 and number 5, to your point, would be fully ideal and be a much more comprehensive, all-encompassing solution. But the backward compatibility story and the level of effort required to standardize these APIs would be absolutely monumental, on the order of,
yeah, but this whole solution you're describing is useless without that. So you're saying you're going to take that on anyway. Now, I'm not arguing for in the slightest that there's only one way to do 1 or 5. And we have to be, anytime we define something like this, we have to take into account the reality of what exists there. But I'm saying that we define some of those, and that yes, car manufacturers and hotels and others we will try and design them in such a way that is close to what they have today, or ideally they can use exactly what they have today. But that we need to take that into account of the design of the whole system, and we're gonna pick some that win and some that lose. It's not like we're going to be able to support everything forever, right? But yeah, that's exactly what I'm proposing, and I think that the meta point here is that the standardizing the relay server without something functionally that works at 1 and 5 is useless anyway.
I think
So,
totally
Colin,
fair points. Oh, yeah, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I mean, you always have good insight into the dispatch outcomes. Are you suggesting that this is perhaps like requirements that would come back and, be an excellent IETF-wide BOF? I think Chris and I are sort of talking about that as maybe the sentiment we're hearing across the room.
I mean, look, I've seen many of these over the years or whatever. My guess is this conversation is going to end in, we should have a BOF that really does this. But I mean, I think that we have to decide, are we defining the syringe and what goes in it, or are we just defining like a carrier for the drugs, right? I mean, those are two very different things to work on. And I'm arguing for, we need to have an architecture for what's on slide 6 here. The overall problem that slide 6 is trying to argue for, I'm totally in favor of doing. And I think that just what I've heard in the call today makes it it's very clear that there are major players who are willing to work together to do something really relevant here. So there's no lack of energy for this.
All right, thanks. Matt, did I cut you off? Were you trying to make a point?
No, not at all. I was just going to respond to one thing that you mentioned, Colin, and then the idea here, the idea here is that since the Credential Authority is integrated on the server side with both device OS OEMs, because even before you talk about any form of sharing, that Credential Authority knows how to provision credentials on both devices, right? That exists today, to my point. And so the idea here being, when the sender initiates the send, it gathers the necessary material from the Credential Authority that's needed to seed the APIs, no matter who the receiver is. And I realize
that makes sense, but I think this gets to the hardware a little bit different. I don't think that exists today at all. Okay. And your point that it exists for merely 2 of the thousands of different types of device OSs out there is an argument that it makes exactly my point of why we need to do the overall scope. So and I want to be clear here. I'm not arguing against doing this work. I'm arguing in favor of, this is great work. We should do it. But the work we need to do is what is your whole slide 6, not just lines 2 and 4 on the slide. That's the only thing, and that's just my point of view. I mean, I'm sure other people have other points of view, but that's sort of my direction of how I think about this. So
awesome, thank you. Why don't we move on? Rich, you get the last spot in the queue.
Actually, Pete Resnick does. He posted a while ago saying he was having device problems. So the question from Pete, which is sort of a elaboration, I think, of what Patrick said initially, is, are you okay if the IETF tears up what you've done and, for example, completely changes the architecture?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm not 100% sure. Oh, there's a bit of an echo here. Do you guys all hear the echo? Maybe it's just me.
It's there. It's better now.
Okay, great, thanks. Like I said, there are large actors in this ecosystem that endeavor to build a solution that solves some of the problems that I've outlined. I think I think if it solves the same goals and is compatible with the way that these things kind of have to work in the credential authority space. And when I say that, I mean there's a number of entities in the world. Think about ASA Abloy and HID and these large credential providers that provide access control systems and key material for the majority of corporations in the world, to be honest, between the two of them, Dormakaba. That we need to define something that plays into these systems that are already there in some way, or it will be decades before anything like this sees the light of day. And so I think the short answer is it depends. I think I'm certainly, and I should say we, I mean, that there's 5 other co-authors on this, but we certainly would love to get feedback and make it better. And I think it's hard to say without seeing where we end up, but I do think we're all committed to the process. And like I said, this is my first time at IETF, but I'm really looking forward to discussing it in additional detail and seeing what we can come up with. And if it's better than what we have here and solves the same problems, then I don't see any reason why we can't, why we wouldn't adopt it, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. So Matt, I'll just give you a little sort of background on why folks ask that question. So dispatch sometimes sees work for what are essentially complete and deployed protocols for which they're looking for, recognition by a standards body, but are not willing to bring that, really allow that standards body to bring its full consensus to how that is going to operate, right? More or less a rubber stamp or nothing, which is not really the mode in which the IETF operates as a collaborative consensus design that has to go on. What I'm hearing more of you is that you've got, some requirements of an existing ecosystem that you want to design a protocol to fit into. That causes challenges, of course, as you go along, but that's, I think a pretty reasonable thing to put on the table and to work around. That's the distinction I usually see. Does that sort of match where you think this lies?
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I mean, there are, a lot of these companies really do want to build a solution that solves this problem. And so I think another thing that I would mention is timing, right? And I realize that academically, having us discuss and debate for as long as it takes to get to the right answer is obviously the right sort of theoretical and academic thing. But a lot of times these companies are want to launch a solution that solves this problem. And I think it wouldn't be intellectually honest if I didn't mention that there are a lot of driving factors here to build something that satisfies these goals. So I guess what I'm saying is if we can establish a working group and discuss it and really dig in on relatively short order, I think that would be fantastic. I truly do welcome the changes, but if it ends up taking, a year or 2 or 3 to come up with the right solution, I think it would be likely that the companies that have been discussing this so far would proceed with something that looks like what I presented today, just in the interest of full disclosure.
No, I mean, that makes a lot of sense. It's often actually a good dynamic when the folks that are actively involved in doing the work, if there were to be an eventual working group, feel some sort of, commercial or otherwise time pressure that tends to result in good outcomes. So normally what we do at this part of the program is that we thank you for this presentation and we move on to the art area section of our agenda, and then Kirsty and I will come back sort of trying to summarize what we've heard in the discussion. I am reminded here that I actually I said I would summarize Ted's email, which did appear to go to the list. I'm not sure why it didn't end up in your mailbox, but let me hit a couple highlights out of there for you in case there's anything you want to address. Ted Hardy says, based on the rest of the draft, I believe the idea here is that digital credentials being sent in a simple way, like an email entitled blah, don't meet the need because the result is not machine readable by the systems. He wants to check in if he's correct. If so, you may want to consider whether device is the right unit of discussion, since even mobile devices can have multiple persona, accounts, etc. Think of work profiles. If it's not, your document needs a good bit of work to rethink some of those core elements, such as account claim. In the end, he thinks the security and privacy aspects of this need a fair amount of work. And that leads him to suggest the answer to the dispatch question is that a working group would be appropriate with both app and security folk involved. Matt, I'll give you the last word.
Great comments and questions. I mean, I think the challenging the noun of device is great. I mean, I've debated that myself for months. You know, I think I don't see a reason why a protocol like this wouldn't work on, you know, another type of device or entity like a laptop or a PC or something like that. It would need the requisite hardware to provision these type of credentials. Like I said, these actors with like, ASA ABLOY, HID, they have very strict compliance requirements and certification requirements for the hardware that stores the credential itself. And so, not a lot of laptops and PCs have that hardware. There's a lot of certification involved in a lot of the mobile payment industry, just for those who are not involved in that industry. PCI compliance, there's all kinds of those restrictions. But I do agree in principle, challenging the term device and what it means is great. I've been doing that myself for quite a while. On the security point, wholeheartedly agree. We have been talking about that on this forum already the past hour quite a bit. I think the security of and what security primitives we would like to guarantee of this protocol are really something that truly needs to be discussed in additional detail. Fully concur with that point.
All right. Thank you so much. And I hope you had a good dispatch experience.
Yeah, thank you so much, Patrick. And thanks to everybody who made comments.
All right. Kirsty.
Yeah, thank you very much. And thanks for the discussion this morning or afternoon or evening or middle of the night, wherever you are. So we're now going to move on to the art section of the meeting today. So that's the end of dispatching. And as Patrick said, we'll go away and talk about and come back at the end of the session with what we think we heard. Matt, I'd just ask you to stop sharing your slides if you can, because I seem to not be able to. Thank you. Super. So we can just talk through what we have coming up in the art meeting. Okay, hopefully you can see that. So we now just have a couple of updates on BOFs, meeting of interest, and the ADs. We'll talk a bit. And then we have just a couple of items that shouldn't take very long at all. So we'll just kind of proceed looking at a reminder. Oh yeah, reminder of mailing lists for art topics and dispatch topics. You can follow up after the session on those email lists as well. So we've just had our dispatch topic and now we're moving into the art area part of the meeting. Francesca, did you want to talk through some of the highlights here? I'm happy to. Okay, I will take.
Right. Mute and mute buttons as always. And I can send my video as well. So thank you, Chrissy, for putting up this this slide together. It is a bit cut, or okay, no, I can slide it. Sorry. So yeah, we have gotten one BOF privacy respecting corporational values on Wednesday. We have new and nearly new art working groups. I wanted to mention OHI, which is in the security area, but because of it's so close to art that it would be good to remind everybody that this is meeting for the first time, Oblivious HTTP application to intermediation. This is the old OHTTP or working group, or both. It changed name a couple of times. We also have a newly chartered working group, MediaMan, Media Type Maintenance. And C-Date is also meeting again, serializing extended data about times and events. And both of these are on Tuesday. Then we have other interesting meetings. Murray, did you want to add something? Or you want to wait?
Can you hear me now? Yeah, it looks good. I just wanted to mention that MediaMan is looking for a co-chair if anybody is interested in helping us with that effort, looking for co-chair experience. Please get in touch with me.
Good reminder, thank you. And also, if you're interested in chairing even if it's not only for MediaMan or for other topics, please get in touch. We're always looking for co-chairs. And Barry, did you have something to add?
Also, we've just rebooted the Skim working group. I don't even remember what it stands for now, but you might want to mention that one.
Yes, yes. Thank you for that. I had it in my notes, but forgot to send to make it to the slide. So yes, Skim reopened, and it was working group that was terminated and had a BOF last IETF, and it is now meeting again. Okay, other meetings include Gen Dispatch, SEC Dispatch, the RC Editor Future Development Program, the IAB Open Meeting, and the SHMU Stay Home Meet Only Online. Yes, so these are all our interesting meetings. I also have a couple more things to mention. I don't have slides for those, but I thought I would take a second if that's okay. So first of all, I wanted to say that Art is now fully working, and I wanted to thank everybody who has made this possible. Every reviewer, Barry as the secretary, thank you so much. This has been, it's now been working for 3 months, or maybe a bit more. It has realized around 30 reviews, I believe, and this has been very, very helpful for me at least, and for Murray, I'm sure. And so I just wanted to take a second and thank you everybody for reading the documents and providing the reviews. That's really good, really great. Another thing I wanted to mention is the only draft the dispatch working group has at the moment, which is the ECMAScript media types update, is currently in last call, and this ends November 15th. So I wanted to mention it just so that everybody's aware that now is the time to take a look and see if the work is ready to advance. Also, I wanted to mention that we are having ArtAD office hours this time as well. So we're only having 1 hour this week, and it's at the end of today. So half an hour after the end of the last session today. I'm not checking the chat. Okay, let's talk about Skim. That's fine. So you're all welcome to come and say hi or talk about any art topic you might want with me or Murray. Yeah, so I hope that some of you show up. Also wanted to remind that side meetings are always a possibility. There is a wiki for it. I can post it in the chat to organize, and that should complement the Gather Town that we have. So I'll try to be in Gather Town as much as possible during this week. So you can come and find me if you would like to say hi. And finally, that the NOMCOM is requiring feedback still. So please remember to do that and take a second to do that. That's good. And I think I covered everything I wanted to. And of course, again, as Murray said, if anybody's interested in sharing, please get in touch with us. That's it for me. A lot of things.
Thank you, Francesca, for all the updates. And yeah, it's really good to see the art team taking off. So super achievements since the last meeting. Well done. So we're just going to have a brief presentation, or really a chat through from Barry Lever, if you're on the call, just about internalisation. Oh, I can't speak. Internalisation. Yeah. Barry?
Well, hi, this is Barry Liba. No, well, actually, I was going to mention art, and then riff from there. And so, Francesca, thanks for plugging that. The goal of the art area review team is, let me turn on my video.
The goal of the art area review team is not to review every document, but to go look at ones that I think, as I do a triage, might benefit from somebody in art looking at them. And so we've been reviewing probably about half of the documents that are going to the IASG, something around there. And we've had good results from that. And as Francesca said, the ADs are pleased with the result of that. And we also have an Internationalization Directorate, which Pete is the secretary for, and it deals with internationalization issues, collects the experts on internationalization. And where I wanted to mention in the junction of the two is that as we are reviewing documents for the art area, we'll sometimes come up with ones that we think might need internationalization expertise to look at it also. So if you're doing an art review and you see things about character strings saying how these strings need to be compared, how these strings are used, particularly things that will be human readable or human enterable, like usernames and passwords, these might be things that should be passed over to Pete as can you get an internationalization review on this as well. What we intend to come up with a list of things to watch for that we can post, and then you can look at those and see what specific issues raise flags that would need an internationalization review. So we're not expecting everybody in the art area to understand all the quirks of why internationalization is hard and what needs to be done, but just to start to learn a few flags that indicate that somebody who knows more about this ought to take a look at it. So we'll be posting something to the art mailing list once we get a list up of these sorts of flag issues. And I think that's all I really wanted to say about that. John Clenson, if you're on, is there anything you want to add? I don't know if John is on. I do not see John on. So
sorry, I'm having coordination problems. The only trick here, which you didn't mention, but which I think is worth mentioning, is that there's a little bit of a balance problem, which is that sometimes when we look at a document, sometimes long before we look at a document that's coming from somewhere else, we discover that there are fundamental issues that need to be addressed in a internationalization specification. And we are lacking ways to develop and handle those specifications and I think it's safe to say that anybody is satisfied with. So that's another piece of this puzzle. But other than that, I think Barry's summary is reasonable.
Okay, thanks, John. And I guess the other thing I'll say about the art area review team is anybody who's not already a reviewer on the art area review team and who wants to help out, please let me know and we'll put you on the team. So watch for a list of flag issues that that John and I will try to come up with, and perhaps others on the Internationalization Directorate. So thanks for your attention.
Yeah, one other observation, if I can break in, as we are working on a more complete list, you can assume in writing your documents that there are going to be two obvious questions as soon as you decide you need characters other than ASCII. One of those questions is why, and the other one of those questions is that unless what you're doing is guaranteed to be free text, which is never going to be compared to anything or looked at other than visually, that writing down the equivalent of just using UTF page is not going to do it. There are complexities there, which I trust as we put the list together, we will elaborate on. But But the most common problem we see is somebody who says, well, this was okay in ASCII, so using UTF-8 and everything will be cool. And usually it isn't. So that's an early preview.
Yeah. Yes, good, good summary on that one. All right. So thanks. That's all I have to say.
Great. Thank you very much, both. Really good update there. And I won't try and say internationalization again. Right, so we're just going to have a final presentation from Spencer. Spencer Dawkins on media over quick, and hopefully you can see those slides. Well, it's just one slide showing for you there, Spencer, so take it away.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity to do this. So some of you, perhaps many of you, remember the video ingest over quick side meeting from IETF111 that was quite, it morphed into something bigger than just that. And there was a media over quick mailing list that was created, which was very quiet until like October 26. But it's heated up now. There are lots of people with different needs for legitimate reasons for what they want to do with media over quick. And we need to understand those needs to do anything at the IETF. We were planning 2 side meetings on media over quick, broadly defined, at IETF112, one on understanding what's needed from the IETF, and one on if we need the second meeting, planning for next steps on Friday. Both of these are at 1815 UTC. They are working meetings, but they are public. So if you could contribute, please come. I expect to publish minutes on the mock mailing list afterwards. You should have live links on this slide in the proceedings for the mailing list and for the that's actually the side meeting link that Francesca was saying she would put in the chat, but it's there also as well. We are interested in hearing from people with a variety of things on their mind, especially I think interested in pain points on what people are not able to do now with various forms of media streaming, ingest, and distribution. I can take questions now, but it's probably best if we don't have the side meeting here.
Thank you, Spencer. If anyone has got questions, please do join the queue. Otherwise, as Spencer said, you can save it for the side meeting. Sounds good.
Thank you all for the opportunity to say this on Monday morning before the side meeting happens.
No, thank you for bringing it. It's really interesting work. Super. So we have got, we have no desire to make the meeting longer than it needs to be, but we do have time on the agenda for any other business or anything that people would like to mention in the flex time. Otherwise, Patrick and I will just get to our dispatch outcome for the one item on our agenda today. I'll just take a pause in case anyone does want to join the queue, as we're navigating Meet Echo functionality still. Either you have nothing to say or you're still trying to find that join queue button, but we'll move on. And so Patrick and I have discussed, and we think that the consensus for the first item, and please do correct or challenge in the queue or on Jabber, we'll just keep an eye on that. We think that the outcome was consensus to have a BOF on the kind of problem space, constraints, requirements, whatever word you want to give to that, but to not focus on a solution, but to kind of scope out the use cases and any constraints around that. We also heard that the community would like this work to have a shout out in Sec Dispatch, so just for awareness, not to redispatch, but we'll see if there's time on the Sec Dispatch agenda just to mention that. And also a note that this belongs really more with the SEC community than art. So whereas Dispatch was of the view that the work belongs a bit more with SEC than art, but that both communities should get to weigh in on the discussion and the BOF. So that's what we heard from the group. I don't see anyone angrily objecting on Jabber or calmly objecting, but I do see Cullen in the queue. Cullen?
Yeah, I was just going to ask, could you be a little crisper about what you want the scope of that conversation to be around requirements for relay, around requirements for the whole problem? And I'm not arguing either way. I'm just asking you to clarify a little bit crisper.
Yeah, no, that's reasonable to clarify. I think we heard that folks found it quite hard to dig the requirements out of the draft, looking at the solutions. So a bit more clarity on what the problem space is, what the problem's actually trying to solve. I know there was some analogy going around, but just kind of whether it's more the protocol or whether it's more what's exactly the relay architecture or that kind of thing. Patrick, would you like to add anything?
No, I mean, I would concur largely with that. I think, Cullen wants to make sure we address the notion of whether how much of the whole problem statement is in scope. And one of the things I heard is, that should probably be a little bit of the app community might drive the scope there, and the SEC community might drive the requirements of the individual protocols a little bit more. And that's actually why I think this is actually suitable for an IETF-wide BOF. Now, of course, Dispatch does not give the go-ahead for BOFs to happen, but we think this is the appropriate avenue to pursue with this work, that it needs that kind of wider conversation. To address exactly the question Cullen is asking, I think, as part of that.
Francesca, you just joined the queue.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that the conversation can continue on the dispatch or ART mailing list while we coordinate with the SEC ADs and with the proponents and try to get something going in the meantime.
Great, thanks everyone. So now it's nearly the end of the meeting. We just have meetings of interest to highlight to you. We had this slide on a little bit earlier. Obviously, it's the first session of the week, so really a lot of stuff going on this week. There's one BOF, and then we've got a few new and nearly new art working groups that might be of interest, and then other kind of interesting meetings there as well. I can see that just in Jabber, Richard, you said you think this doesn't belong in SEC. Would you like to just come to the mic and talk about why that might be?
Sorry, am I audible here? Yeah, looks like it.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's just my quick evaluation on the credential transfer draft. It seems to me like the interesting questions there are around kind of the broader architecture of the application, who the players are, what their relationships are, as opposed to the details of the cryptography. The cryptography needs to be arranged properly, but I think that's an area where we could bring in some security area expertise and people who understand how to do those sorts of things, and focus on the application architecture as the more interesting problems. So as you said, I think this will require expertise from both sides, but I think on balance it's slightly more in the app area than the security area.
Okay, thanks for bringing that to the queue. I can see quite a lot of people in Jabber agreeing with you as well. I think this is because when we asked the question earlier in Jabber about SEC or art, every response that came back said SEC, but it's good to see that there is actually a community that thinks it probably belongs more in art as well. So we'll, I think Francesca may take that away and discuss with the SEC ADs and just sort of work out where it sits more naturally, but it's good to have the feedback from the community, so thank you for bringing that point to the queue. That's super.
Yes, exactly what you said, Kirsty. We will coordinate with the ADs. This might be another example of cross area with the work being done in one area and the responsible AD being from the other area. So we'll see, but thank you for the feedback.
Great, thanks everyone. So with that, I think we're good to close out the Dispatch and Art area meeting. Thanks so much for your discussion. Thanks to all of our presenters, and thanks for the good discussion and Q&A that we had going on. It was really good start to the week. So thanks from me, and have a great rest of the week. Take care.
Test 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, I switched to speaking through my monitor mic and listening through my headset. We'll see if.
But we are being recorded, just so you know.
Well, that's okay. The end of the meeting will have strange speaking on it.
This will come back to haunt him later.
And some of us are very glad to have a break before our next meeting.
And you guys are not hearing echo from me?
No, it's wonderful.
Good. Okay. Then this is what I'll do, is I'll just use the...
There's a tiny bit of tinniness, but
I
It's
can
within the realm of
speak
normal.
toward the speak higher in the room
Nope.
and see if it comes
Nope.
in the mic. But yeah.
Nope, that does not help.
All right. We'll see what we can do about getting the mic on my headset to work, but this will work for now. Thank you, gents.
Bye, Pete.